By 1974, William Friedkin had positioned himself at the very top of the Hollywood tree. He'd achieved the impossible not once, but twice. First, he'd sweep the Oscars with his ultra-real crime thriller, The French Connection, taking cues from Costa-Gavras' documentary approach with Z from 1969 to create a gritty drama, the likes of which Hollywood had never seen before. Then of course came The Exorcist, a true horror that not only terrified audiences, but remained grounded in the kind of realism that was so far removed from the campy ghouls of the time. At this point, Friedkin could do no wrong. His next picture was to be a retelling of Georges Arnaud's The Wages of Fear. Based on Arnaud's book, Friedkin set out to make his very own version of the story. This was not to be a remake of Henri-Georges Clouzot's film of the same name from 1953. This was going to be a far more psychological and existential affair. This was going to be Sorcerer. Sorcerer is the gripping tale of four outlaws on the run from violence, death and money troubles, who have all evaded capture and landed in a place that can truly be called Hell on Earth. Roy Scheider is Jackie Scanlon, a small-time crook who goes on the run after surviving a botched robbery and is now laying low in the South American jungle. The film opens with four separate segments, in a way recalling the opening Iraq sequence from The Exorcist. These sequences feel detached from one another and from the rest of the film itself, and yet they are absolutely essential to framing the story. This is a story of bad men facing their own pasts, and to understand that, Friedkin again demonstrates his unique vision as a filmmaker in search of truth. His camera never shies away from the brutality. We are introduced to a crooked investment banker accused of fraud in the millions, a hitman seemingly without conscience, and incredibly when you consider that this is one of our heroes, a terrorist. But Friedkin doesn't sugarcoat any of these personalities. Even Scheider's Scanlon is part of a brutal robbery, leaving violence in its wake. This approach sets Sorcerer apart. We have no hero. Sure, Scanlon is an everyman type, but he's not a good guy in the classic sense. However, as the film progresses, through the sheer ordeal that we will witness, we at least come to urge this unlikely band of brothers to make it through. The premise of the film itself is rather simple. The four men all seek shelter in the same South American village, all looking to get out and leave their troubled pasts finally to rest. When an oil well bursts into flames, the local company resolves that the only way to put the fire out is to use dynamite. The only dynamite available has been left in such poor conditions that it is now highly unstable, and the only way to transport it to the location of the fire will be to move each container separately via large trucks along the treacherous jungle terrain. 2 cases of dynamite means 4 people, 2 to a truck alternating driving and guiding duties. And what kind of a man would be willing to undertake this suicide mission? A man with nothing to lose and even less to risk. This village has 4 of them. The film is legendary for some of its tense sequences in the second half of the film, but this betrays the brilliance of the tension in the first hour. We watch as men put themselves forward for the job, and whilst we know the 4 we will see, it's never as straightforward in a Friedkin film. As we see the dishonour between the men played out in front of our eyes, we understand the true heart of the movie. These desperate men who have left everything they ever lived for are now on the cusp of death if they cannot band together to overcome the odds, and there's not a modicum of trust between any of them. As soon as the trucks fire up, there is an almost impending doom that echoes through the screen. This is the man who brought us The Exorcist, and the same unnerving dread is felt here. We hear the groans and see the almost grotesque faces of the trucks themselves, adding a supernatural element to the movie. And once the crew begin their mission, the film transforms into an entirely different beast. From here on out, these men will constantly face their own mortality as they very slowly navigate the otherworldly forces of the jungle and the ticking time bomb that they're each riding. Friedkin broke through working television, namely Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and with Sorcerer he displays more than a little understanding passed down from the master of suspense. As the hulking trucks pass over each obstacle, the camera will hold as we watch every inch of the wheels turn over the potentially life-threatening trap, and the tension ramps up with each passing scene. First we see Scanlon and his co-driver Kassem attempt to cross a wooden rotting bridge. The camera holds on the tyres as they crumble the wood beneath it, and with every glance we understand the terror. One false move, one error of judgment, one heavy foot, and they will be blown to smithereens. As the viewer, we are along for every inch of the ride. The central set piece of the film involves both trucks navigating an old bridge swaying in the wind and downpour of the jungle. This is one of the finest set pieces in cinema history. The whole force of the jungle, the weight of these men's past, God himself seems to be raining down on them as this huge, menacing death machine carries them across the bridge. It is a perfectly created sequence as we watch Scanlon and Manson battle with nature whilst Nilo and Kassem helplessly attempt to guide them through. It is here where we find the four men, filled with self-loathing, regret, remorse, face their perils head-on in a desperate attempt to just stay alive. The whole world around them seems to pit against them as if they'll now pay for their sins. It is truly nail-biting as we watch, as if we're on that very same bridge and somehow we're willing each of them on to succeed. Another moment of high tension comes later as the men must remove an obstacle of a fallen tree in their path. They can't go around it, and there's no turning back at this point, but Kassem, master of explosives that he is, finds a solution involving some of the dynamite. But of course, dynamite resting on sand in the back of your truck is one thing. Handling this incredibly explosive material whilst building essentially a bomb is quite another. Friedkin approaches this methodically. We watch as the team work together to build the device that will again either set them free or finally lay them to rest. And it is by this point in the movie where we see that this unlikely band has now forged somewhat of a twisted friendship, still full of mistrust, but with an understanding that they need to pull together in this if they wish to make it out alive. The final 30 minutes of the film are for me the most compelling in Friedkin's body of work, and some of the strongest in the history of film. The four men are no longer the men they left behind in their previous lives. They're not even the men that left the village. These are men who are facing death, and they have embraced it. They run only on adrenaline now. You get the sense that if any of them even make it out of here alive, they'll never be the same again. And Friedkin constantly reminds us of the fragility of life within this final act. We see flashes of a life past as Scanlon drives across the existential wasteland. There are very few moments in film as captivating as the last half an hour of Sorcerer. After delays and excess budget, the film was finally released in the summer of 1977, a date that became synonymous with one event, the release of Star Wars. It's fair to say that the impact of Star Wars was not a positive one on Sorcerer, as it passed by without a whimper. It's been since regarded as a minor masterpiece that did not find its time, but I'd go a step further. This is one of the greatest films ever made, and yet, quite fitting to its dark and unsettling nature, was a film that audiences of the time simply could not tune to in its theatrical run. I liken it in that sense to The Thing, another pessimistic view on the nature of man, with a brutally honest depiction of trust and fear that got lost at the time to a cutesy little alien that just wanted to go home. Sorcerer is a perfect film. The multinational cast is stellar. Friedkin himself attributes some of the lack of the performance of the movie due to its missing star. His intention was to cast Steve McQueen. I wholeheartedly disagree with his viewpoint here. I think Scheider's Bogart of the 70s is a perfect piece of casting. He carries a sense of weight along with him. You would never buy that McQueen ended up in the South American jungle because he's too charming and good looking to become lost to the world. Sure, it might have added a few more dollars at the box office, but that isn't what Sorcerer is ultimately about, and Scheider is as perfect here as everybody else. We also have Friedkin to thank for Tangerine Dream. He discovered them in the early 70s and decided they would be perfect to compose a score for Sorcerer. It's a truly astonishing piece of work that still gives me goosebumps every time I hear it. And from here on out we get Thief, Risky Business, Legend, Miracle Mile, Near Dark, and so many more. Though for my money the Sorcerer soundtrack is the greatest work they ever produced. Which brings me back to Friedkin himself. Much like Herzog's Aguirre and Fitzcarraldo, or Coppola's Apocalypse Now, this was a filmmaker at the height of his powers, risking everything he had to bring his vision to life. He would make great movies after Sorcerer, but like Coppola, he would never have the same ambition. And nobody else would either for that matter. Sorcerer is at the very peak of cinematic achievement. It is a film without fault other than the timing of its release. If you've never seen this film, find 2 hours, shut yourself away without any distractions, and immerse yourself in one of the most powerful, heart-racing, and frankly brilliant films ever made.